Hey everybody. So no music today. I wanted to. I had other stuff on my mind. In fact, but I do want to talk about something that's related. I want to talk about Draco, my little boy, and homeschooling. I've actually thought about doing a thing on homeschooling. Um, if the stream, by the way, is still choppy, there's nothing I can do about it. We're transmitting. Everything's good on this end. So, anyways, in any case, I with Draco, the way that I teach him, the way that he's schooled, is reflects very much the way that I teach almost all of my master classes. In terms of, like as an example, in terms of presenting a concept instead of just giving you a thing. There's about 100 billion reasons for doing that. I'm just going to lower this and see if this helps. One of the reasons is, let's see if I can make this actually fit the screen here. One of the reasons is because when you just directly give somebody an answer to something, they don't actually learn anything. If you tell somebody they have to go between point A and point B, the best thing to do is let them just try to do it first. This is true no matter what it is that you're studying. Just let them try to actually work out how to get from point A to point B, because no matter whether they do it correctly or incorrectly or however you want to say it, ultimately they'll learn because their learning process is engaged. They also may surprise you with their, like they surprise you with their ingenuity. How's that? Maybe that's a little better. In any case, Draco's homeschooled, and when a kid is homeschooled, people say, like, they have this Pavlovian response to it where they'll say, well, what about socialization? In which you just have to tell me, I didn't say he was locked in the home. He's just being homeschooled there. The truth is, for any of you who might be thinking about having kids or have kids and are thinking about homeschooling, homeschooling is the best thing in the entire universe. It's the best. It could not possibly be better for so many reasons. But the truth is, if you're a weirdo, your kid's going to be a weirdo. It's just that simple. If you're a little antisocial freak, your kid's going to be an antisocial freak. If not, your kid's social skills are fine. You just put them in activities. Draco does baseball, he does taekwondo, he has play dates with friends, he does a lot of different stuff. He's got friends all over. And usually what that socialization stuff is code for is just getting treated like shit by other kids most of the day and learning to conform and be part of the popular crowd or feel the pain of not being in the popular crowd. And that's important too. But you don't need that like 6 hours a day, 5 days a week to learn that, you know? Draco gets a good measure of that just being around other kids. Remember, kids don't, like when it comes to conflict resolution and stuff like that, it's the blind leading the blind if you just have other kids work it out. The goal of a child is to become an adult, so you want to model how they're supposed to be. Kids don't know anything about conflict resolution, so if you want to learn about that, an adult needs to teach you. But anyway, don't want to get too much into that. But homeschooling is the absolute best. When you homeschool your kid, I will tell you this is one thing that happens. Academically, almost always, your homeschool kids are going to be way, way, way academically above people his age. It's not because our kids are so much smarter. It's because their schooling is perfectly tailored to them. Everything is custom. So if you're working on a concept and your kid gets it, you can move on. And if he doesn't, you can work on it and say it a different way or do whatever until he gets it. If every kid had one-on-one teachers that could entirely customize the lesson plan, your kids would be farther along too. It's kind of a parlor trick. It's kind of a parlor trick with homeschooling that your kids are usually a lot more advanced academically. But so that's just a thing. But the other thing about it is that when you homeschool, you have an opportunity to decide exactly what it is that your kid is going to learn. There's not any set curriculum, at least the way we're doing it. If you're a responsible parent, and usually people who are going to do homeschooling are responsible, that's why they're taking on the amazing challenge of it, then you're not going to use your homeschooling opportunity and just plug your kid in front of a video game all day. You're not that kind of person generally. Otherwise, if you just wanted to if you wanted to raise a brain dead kid, you just send him to school or just do whatever. No, I mean, you know what I'm saying. So those things, that tends to solve itself. But outside of basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, all the rest of that, you get to decide what your kid's going to know and think about what you want to teach them. I wanted to show you something just as an example, kind of, Draco gets his math from his mother. His mother's a 4-time New York best-selling author of math books, so she's got him in like 7th grade in math or something right now. It's some crazy thing. But of course, Draco learns reading and writing, and he's got the math from her. I teach him music. Draco also studies logic and philosophy and debate, which are things that kids are not taught in schools. This week he had to write a paper. He had to write papers in favor of and against things that he loves. And convincingly so. That's one of the things he's learning to do. That is actually the basis for empathy and compassion. It's an important exercise, not just debate. Debate gets you around compassion, because what happens is, when a lot of times people will say, well, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes. That's compassion, but that's not true. Because the way people corrupt that is they go, all right, well, let me think. Now, if I was a moron, what would I think? You know what I'm saying? They don't have an inherent respect or value for the other opinion. So when you're teaching logic and debate properly, it can't be a phony argument. It's got to be one that is truly internalized. And in order to do that, you have to set aside your biases, because they'll trip you up, and when you can truly set aside your biases and make an argument, then you're starting to understand the true essence of compassion. Compassion and empathy are not based on putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's being able to defend and truly understand their position, even if you don't agree with it. That's the essence of compassion. So Draco does logic and debate exercises, and also philosophy. And history. We talk a lot about the world. We talk about the ways, we talk about pattern recognition in music. Well, human beings are exactly the same way. Human beings are the same. No matter where you go in history, it's all the same people. So we talk about history, and rather than just have him do what I did, which is memorize dates and times and facts, which he can do all day long, kids can. I could do that. That's how I was a straight A student, because I could memorize. It was not an issue. So instead, we talk about the people and the dynamics and what was going on in the society and what their motivations were in ways in which we can relate to them. And then, some of when they born and when they were died. Yes, some of that. But it's more important to relate him to the world that he's living in. And this is coming to a theme. Just hang with me. But the other thing that happens with kids is that adults almost universally criminally underestimate children. Especially when it comes to grandiose concepts and philosophies. Adults assume that children are every bit as narrow-minded and dogmatic and rigid and unbending as they are, and the opposite is true. Children are infinitely more willing to entertain concepts and new ideas. They don't have any inherent bias or fear of doing that. It comes from the parent. If the parent is afraid or doesn't know how to discuss something and has no philosophy or wisdom, if the parent is afraid of death, will not be able to talk about death to their child without scaring the shit out of them. That's how that goes. But it isn't because the kid can't handle it. Draco knew about death. He was like 4 or 5, and has had many interesting things to say about death and the people in his life that have died, and his changing thoughts about it that he reports on from time to time. And that's because nobody's afraid of it in his sphere. We don't know what it is. We don't know what happens when we die. Some people believe we go to heaven. Some people believe this. We talk about all that stuff. And Draco's been churning on it his whole life. There's never been any nightmares or any of that stuff. But that comes back to what we imbue our children with. So Draco was never spoken to like we never did want water, more. What the fuck? We never talked to him like that. Never talked down to him. Never did that. Because that's the other way we learn. We learn by bounded volume. If you walked into a room and you were like, this is going to be your life, and there's human beings crawling up the walls and doing backflips and shit, somewhere in your brain you're like, okay, all this is possible, and apparently what I'm going to learn. And even if you don't know how you're going to begin to get to the point where you're scaling a wall and doing a backflip, somewhere you have a bounded volume for what's expected of you. And that's really, really important. So in learning, when you talk to a child and you give them complex sentence structure, it's just like when I teach music and we learn composition and orchestration and voice leading all at the same time. It creates a bounded volume of total expectations for your brain. It changes the way that you learn. It makes it infinitely more effective and efficient. And kids can handle it, if you can handle it, and if you can teach it. And that's the great challenge and wondrous thing about being a homeschool teacher. You have to think about, what do you want to teach and how do you teach it? Part of that is talking about conceptual understanding. And I want to show you something Draco just did the other day. Because Draco does art and he does music and he does other things. His art projects have always consisted primarily of building things, manufacturing stuff. And I knew that his drawing skills were way behind for a 9-year-old. I just knew it. He just didn't do a lot of drawing. He did a lot of stuff in the computer, modeling, and teaching him visual effects like this. But I wanted to just show you something. This isn't just a father's pride or whatever, but I wanted to show you the human learning model at work. Because you possess this, I possess this, we all possess this, and the greater degree to which we put this into our lives, the more potential we have for the true reach and extent and depth of our thinking, reasoning, and philosophy. I want to show you something. He's been watching a little bit of, we don't watch much TV, but he's been watching the Dukes of Hazzard. Somebody asked me what the subject is today. The subject is, it's Mike Verta's channel. He's been watching the Dukes of Hazzard. He likes the Dukes of Hazzard because how can you not like the Dukes of Hazzard? So I said, okay, well, here's a picture of the General Lee. So why don't you draw the General Lee? He's like, okay, I'll draw the General Lee. So he got his little pencil down, and this is what he drew. He drew this. General Lee, he drew that. And I said, that's terrible. So does that look like the General Lee? And he said, well, no. I said, I'm going to have to agree with you. That is not, we need to work on your drawing. So we took this terrible General Lee, and I gave Draco a couple, we both agreed it was terrible. And I said, all right, well, let me give you some principles, exactly the same way that I do when I teach him music. Principles, framework, conceptual framework. I gave him a couple things about drawing cars, a way to, to determine the wheelbase and generally where the frame is going to be and where the door brakes are going to kind of be. I mean, specifically, it's 3.5 wheel dimensions between wheels. So I said, all right, let's start with that. And he started first, you can see, he started drawing some wheels there underneath it that were approximately the same size as the General Lee, see if you can get that. And I said, let's start with that and start thinking about applying these principles. Now, it's very important when you teach somebody something to not do it for them. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It matters that it's their learning process and relational database at work. So I gave him a couple of principles, and I said, okay, now you start drawing cars based on these principles. And these are literally the first ones he drew. I made him, you can see maybe he erased the wheels after this, and he was applying a couple of philosophies. He was applying the wheelbase and approximately where the frame begins. He was experimenting. He hadn't gotten, let's see if I can hold this back. He hadn't gotten any rules for how far these distances were. He knew these distances, and he just started drawing. This is literally 5 minutes later. Then I said, okay, keep doing that. And he went to the next set of drawings here, where again, he's just playing around, keeping his wheelbases consistent, playing with the thickness and the thinness. He keeps looking at the reference picture. I don't know, the light's blowing this out. And he's looking at the thickness, and he's just doing this, trying to work it out. And I let him sleep on it. He came back the next morning. I said, all right, let's try to do the General Lee again, using your principles. By the way, sleeping on it and letting his brain work on it is an important part of the process. The next day, those were 3 General Lees that he drew. And then that was his last one that day. This is 24 hours, and nobody touched a pencil, nobody fixed a thing, nobody showed him how to do anything. And so that's 24 hours. Now, I'm showing this to you not because my kid's some amazing fucking artist or because I'm some amazing fucking teacher, because I actually didn't do anything. His brain did this. Like your brain does, and like my brain does, and does like everything else. Ultimately, the distance, the delta between those 2 attempts was simply him applying a couple of conceptual ideas, an overarching framework. And then he worked out the details. I never had to take his pencil. I never had to give him something to follow. This is essentially the opposite of the way in which we learn and the way in which we teach people. And so most of us are in the habit of learning that way too. It's completely backwards and limiting. So I wanted to just show that as an example, because anywhere in your life, if you are attempting to acquire a skill or master a skill or further a skill, and you should be, because what the fuck else are you doing with your life? You're either getting better or getting worse. There's nothing in life ever stays the same. Every muscle in your body every day is getting stronger or weaker. Your brain is getting sharper or duller. That's how life is. That's so some of a great way to live your life, all of us, is to try to be better the next day, smarter, more empathetic, more courageous, more. Try. Time's gonna run out, and then that's all you got. That's all you get. It's over. So what you do, you are what you leave behind. Make the most out of it. This is one of the philosophies he's been taught. Uncle Bourbon talked about that the other night. But anyway, that's an astounding difference between beginning and end in 24 hours. And the only difference at work was one was him just guessing, and the other one was given a conceptual framework. When we have been doing some transpositions and people, people are asking, well, what's the chords and what's the chords? And so often I'm just like, work it out, because it doesn't matter how bad you fail. I'll give you some conceptual frameworks. I'll give you things like find the bass note and then try major and minor chords. Or I'll give you a conceptual thing like there are these 5 chord progressions which are used all the time. Armed with that knowledge, your process for learning to transcribe and building up your understanding of how music works will be infinitely accelerated. And it's custom tailored to your brain. That's your brain being your own tutor, just like a homeschooling kid gets. And that's the way that they're so far ahead generally, that's how you can be. So wherever in your life, and the music is as great place to study as anything because of the huge amount of ambient complexity, look for the conceptual, the large scale umbrella over the thing that you're studying, and the patterns, the ubiquitous patterns which relate that to your life, if your goal is to increase your power. Now, I said all this is warming to a theme, and it is. And one of the themes that comprises Draco's education is the world that he lives in, the world that he's been born into, and what is ultimately the expectation on him. We all get expectations. You're going to grow up and then something's going to happen. As you grow up, your adults in your life will usually tell you what is going to happen. Or they'll tell you what should happen. Or they'll tell you what usually happens. That's just how it is when you raise a kid. They're going to be a certain number of years. Draco's 9, so what's he got, 9 years, basically? So one of the things that I've told Draco which I'm going to share with you now, I will warn you right now, is a red pill. Many or most people cannot handle this in any way. Don't have the patience for it, don't have the interest in it, don't want to hear it. It's not pleasant. But it's an absolutely crucial thing for Draco to be aware of as he plans what kind of human being he's going to be when he's an adult. All that being said, it's actually a very positive, amazing, wonderful time for him to be alive, and I am envious of him in that regard. The world that Draco's being born into is infinitely more interesting than the one I was born into. It just happens to be that way because, as I've explained to Draco, civilization has already collapsed. Civilization as we know it, as it's been, is over. It's officially over. Its inertia is causing it to do this, like Rome. Rome didn't stop overnight. It wasn't like Gladiator Games Thursday, Ruins Friday. It took like 200 years. Big things take a while to slow down. But one of the things I've taught him is that we're basically going to be doing a soft reboot. You know, like with Star Wars, like you can still get the old Star Wars, but Disney's trying to like make the new Star Wars. That's basically the world that he's been brought into, which is extremely exciting. Because although the world of my youth is gone, the one where you go to school and you get a decent education and then you, you go to college and you get a good job and then you get a 401k and family, or whatever, that's all over. But what's in its place is anything you want it to be. What Draco has, what our kids have that we didn't have is, you can now make the world, your world, any world you want it to be. He has friends all over the world, just like I do. My little close group of friends, I've told him too, you're only going to have a few people in your life. A small number of people that you truly admire and respect and love, that you truly would trust with your life. It's only ever going to be a few people. That's true for you, for all of us. You have friends that are fun or whatever, but it's always a small number. Mine are all over, they're on every continent. My little group is all over the world. My clients, all my work is all over the world. I don't even work here where I live. And unlike the way it was when I was a kid, and probably the way you were, unless you're younger, I hope the younger ones are listening. You know, you don't have to have a home. You don't have to live. People live in cargo things if they want to now, or you could have 4 homes, or you could live in 4. You could be on a boat, or you could have 3 different jobs. Hell, in this time, you can choose if you're a man or woman. Apparently, you can choose anything. And nobody's going to say shit about it. And we're all connected, and the entire compendium of human knowledge is available for free. I cannot imagine a more interesting time to be alive. The downside is that it's because civilization has collapsed. It's over. The world as we know it is done. It cannot survive. And if you have any doubts about that, I'm going to tell you the story that I told Draco of how it happened and how he ended up being born into the world that he's in. But all of this, of course, plays a very big role in governing what Draco learns. Because Draco needs to have the skills to make his own world, whatever that world needs to be, the new world that he'll build, that we could all start building as soon as they let us out of our fucking cages. However, regardless, we can't know where we're going without an acknowledgement of where we started, where we ended up, and how we got here. So I'm going to tell you the story of this failed experiment in humanity, this wondrous, amazing cusp moment that we're living in. I'm going to tell you how we got here. And hopefully, by the end, you will feel as Draco and I feel about it, which is 1, it's true, and 2, it's awesome. And I'm not saying that, I'm not kidding about that. I really do think we are fucking lucky to be right here because we get to rebuild the world. But we won't unless we have infinitely more in common with the people who started it all, which today we have nothing in common with. We are no longer connected in any way to the human beings and the civilization that we inherited. Here's the story. Feel free to click off, but here it goes. This is exactly what I've taught Draco. We talk about this all the time. One of the most important things for human beings, maybe the most important thing, is a sense of purpose, value, worth. It's probably the keystone. Why am I here? How do I have value? That question and that drive is behind virtually everything that we do. That's what graffiti is. I was here. I matter, right? Or Trump Towers or Sears or any of the things written on a building. I was here. I matter. I talked about this the other night. That's what the flag, the American flag on the moon. We were here. We matter. Having value and purpose is the keystone for a human being. And when all of this started thousands of years ago, that sense of purpose was very easy to feel because 99% of human beings who have ever lived, except for just recently in history, were primarily engaged in survival, the acquisition of food, the basics. Everything that they had to create for themselves. There was no power, there were no computers, there were no airplanes, there was no modern medicine, there wasn't anesthetic. Everything that they had to make. And there were also a lot fewer people. And these two things really help, because when there's fewer people, then the individual contributions of those people is greater. Like if we wanted to make a movie and we only had 5 people to do it, everybody's going to multitask. You're going to have to both pull focus and move the lights and push the dolly and get the actors' makeup and do the crafts. So everybody's going to have to do more. There's not that many of us. But then it also means when the movie comes out, you have a real sense of ownership and pride because you did that. Your sense of purpose. Well, at the beginning of society, you didn't eat unless you could hunt or fish or farm. And you had to eat every day. And you had no home except for the one that you built. And you built it. You and maybe your parents or father or your community built it. So every day, all day long, your value, your importance, your sense of self, your sense of purpose is all around you. And it grounds you and connects you to your world. You know, most little towns that would just start, the towns were built by the people in the town. And when they would go into the town square, they'd see their own handiwork. I'm part of this. This is my town and my home and the tomato that I planted and fed to my child. This is what all human beings did for most of the time there's been human beings. A clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of value. And if that wasn't enough, every once in a while someone would come and try to take what you had, what you'd made, and you might defend it. And then that gives you another sense of purpose. They tried to take it from me, but we still have it thanks to me. Or maybe you see something somebody else has, and you all get together and you go and you conquer those people and you take everything they have and you come, look what we got. Yeah, we killed them all, and look what we got. And then that also is a sense of purpose. But it's tangible. It's real. The most important thing that human beings need, they have, because they don't have a choice. Still, for some people, even way at the beginning, that sense of purpose wasn't enough. Just wasn't enough. Wasn't enough to be a farmer. Wasn't special enough, maybe. The other way that our ancestors, our predecessors, found their sense of purpose was by aligning themselves to a higher power, a god of some kind. Took many forms. It's literally called serving a higher purpose, Usually it was serving and worshiping God, the creator of all things. Of course, this requires that you believe in that. Now, this goes all the way back. Earliest civilizations, there were priests or traders or shamans or whatever. But it had one very strong advantage, and it has one big disadvantage. The advantage is, obviously, the contribution that you're making is now considerably more significant. I mean, this guy over here is just farming. Well, everybody farms. But you're working for the architect of infinity. And we're going to assume that people believe that. Yeah, you have the biggest, best job in the universe. That brings with it an extreme sense of superiority and righteousness, because kind of how couldn't it? If everybody else is just trying to get through the day, but you work for God? God? Huge sense of self-righteousness and superiority. That's both good and bad. The bad part about it is that it's an act of faith. And faith and facts are mutually exclusive concepts. It is not an act of faith to believe the grass is green. The grass is green. You can't say that that's an act of faith. I believe the grass is green. You don't have to believe it. It is green. That's a fact. In order for faith to exist, there can't be a fact. It's not an act of faith when something is a fact. It's the most important part about faith. I know a lot of humans have wanted to have it both ways. That's where they get into trouble, but we'll talk about that. But this is a very important part of the entire equation. In fact, by the way, just the most devoutly religious thing a person could say, the greatest testament to their faith would be to say, no, I don't have a fact, but I believe it anyway. I believe that tree was created by God. I believe it. So strong, such is the measure of my faith. If it's a fact, it requires no faith. It's not faith. It's not faith. You can only have faith in something that requires faith. If it's a fact, it's not faith. It's very simple. It's either or. And it is when people try to make them the same thing. That's where they get into trouble. But regardless, because it's an act of faith, unlike the tomato that you grow and get your sense of self from, which cannot be doubted, somebody can doubt your faith. And when your faith is the way in which you get your sense of purpose and value, then that doubt means that they are questioning your value and your worth. And that's why there have been almost no world wars that I can think of between farmers, but countless world wars in our history between religious groups. Because the answer to that challenge, I doubt your God, I doubt your faith, has always been met with hate and vitriol and violence. Whole lands, worlds, countless millions of people burned, stoned, tortured in the name of religion, because it takes the all-important sense of self with it. I want to make it clear that neither to Draco or to you or to myself are we actually bashing religion here, because the impetus to be a part of a religion is relatable, because sense of self, sense of purpose is fundamental to who we are. And this seems like a pretty good alternative. I'm more than just a farmer. Everybody's a farmer. I'm serving God. Yes. Unfortunately, with that self-righteous superiority, with that faith comes doubt. And when that doubt challenges your value, religion and religious people have only historically reacted one way. This has been true since the dawn of time. Religion cannot be separated from the initial foray into civilization of our species. It was absolutely a crucial and secondary player. Maybe a principal player. But there was something very, very, very important that kept it all together, that unified totally disparate ways of achieving sense of self. Where the person who grew the tomato says, "This is my tomato. You cannot doubt my tomato." Well, even the most devoutly religious person would have to concede that no food would magically materialize on a plate. They too had to farm. They too had to create their world. They too had to have the skills to fish and hunt and make a fire and navigate by the stars. They had to do this in order to survive. No matter what your bent was, they were all in it together. This is such a crucial component of what kept early civilization together. The weak did not survive. Everybody who was weak died in the winter. Everybody was in it together, just trying to survive. And so you had essentially competing philosophies, but they had the most important thing in common: sense of self, purpose. And the very fact of their life meant that they were connected to their life and to the world. They made the crops. They built the buildings. No one can take that away from them. This is how it began. And so it went for thousands of years. People, there was more and more people, but not actually huge significant amounts. And we made some advancements here and there, but the world still was primarily defined by two camps by which people valued themselves: the tangible and practical ways. I'm a soldier, I fight for the empire. I'm a cleric, I'm a priest, I'm a minister, I'm a missionary. I fight for God. I spread the word of God. Okay. But we all have to farm, fish, build a fire, build our homes. Every once in a while, the religious zealots, being in that shaky position, would get angry when you doubted it, and then they would wipe out everybody and burn and kill and do all that stuff. And they would scream all the angry, vitriolic, hateful things that they say, like denier and blasphemer, because everything is on the line. We're talking about a very, very deep metaphysical, personal shaking to the roots that comes when you shake up a person's belief. That's the downside. It's the upside, downside. The upside of doing the tomato is, hey, I made the tomato. You can't tell me I make the tomato. But then all I did was, I'm a farmer. Everybody's a farmer. This guy, I work for God, but I can't prove it. So it's up and down. Still. All of this changed. All of it changed. All of it came to an end when the industrial revolutions began. And there was at least, historians, are historians, there's at least a couple of those industrial revolutions as far as we've delineated. But it is important to realize what happened when technology and machines, even in their simplest form, began to show up in the human equation. The most significant fundamental shift in human civilization began when industrialization, when machines of any significance became a part of our lives. A couple of things happened, all of which are important. It's a multi-pronged thing, so try to stay with me. One thing is, it began to displace the usefulness of people. Number two, it began to increase personal wealth and prosperity. And number three, it also ushered in population growth. This trend would continue, but it's important to take a second and look at the roots of what those three things mean. The advantage of a machine is that it can do the work of 10 men. But that's 10 men who don't have work to do. And the work and the thing that we produce is the thing that gives us value. There are also more men, and just don't get on my nuts about it. It was mostly men. Yes, women, yes, of course. Trust me, women's contributions are immeasurable, regardless. There's more men to work. And we talked about earlier, the more people there are, the less the individual contribution to the whole. So, to accelerate the process a little bit, what essentially happens is you've got a person who builds a thing, but now a machine comes that can do the work of 10 of you. Well, during this transitory time, they're not going to just get rid of all those extra guys. So we get the concept of make work. All right, well, you guys, because the machine's going to handle this, but you guys can go over here and you can do this. And what this needs is we need to have the button pushed in and we need to have it turned and then painted yellow. One guy could easily do this job, but you've displaced 10 guys. So what begins is compartmentalization. Okay, so you're going to push the red button, you're going to push the button in, you're going to turn it, and you're going to paint it yellow. And now, in this compartmentalization, this necessary compartmentalization, you've reduced the pride and the ownership, and thus the sense of purpose and self. You've made it a fraction of what it is. Now, the individual worker who looks at a thing can't say, I made that. Oh, yeah, what'd you make? Well, I did there's a part inside. Oh, you did those? Well, I did the one in that panel. I did that. And it becomes increasingly difficult to feel the pride. It's not like when you had to farm and build your house and defend against the Huns and teach your child to fish. And I went like this, boink, 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 and then they put another one and I went boink, boink, boink. It gets harder and harder to feel a sense of pride. But, as we said, the third prong over here, personal income started to become a thing, steady growth of personal income. When people were making more money and could do more things with that money, which is a pretty good answer to that, except that this was to continue. If you go back and you watch in the 40s or the 50s, and you watch television shows like Twilight Zone or Star Trek, you will see, as technology and machines were becoming more and more prevalent, you'll see cautionary tales about the rise of the machines, and they always have the exact same theme. It's that machines are going to displace man, and you can't, because a man's work is his purpose and his contribution. It's everything I'm talking about tonight. In fact, I actually watched one of those Twilight Zones earlier today. It's something about Mr. Whipple, the something of Mr. Whipple, and it's about a guy he's got a plant, and in the beginning he says, we currently employ 238,000 people in our plants, but thanks to the new XBJ7 computer, we're going to be able to eliminate 61,000 jobs, and we're going to be able to do all these things. And of course, all the various players in the company are pleading to him, you can't just fire people. That's a man's work. It's his life. You can't just turn it over to the soulless machine. There's so many shows like this. There's Star Trek up the M5 computer can do the thing. And of course, in those shows, the computer always fails. The machine always fails. And they're an impassioned plea, almost to themselves. Don't diminish our value. This is where we get our value. It almost seems quaint, except it turns out that they were right. Now, while this is happening, something else is happening, which is that part of what the machines are doing is doing things for us. That's part of their advantage. And so what begins is a process where people don't have to have as many skills to ensure their own survival. Whereas for 99% of the humans who've lived, where every winter was a challenge of survival, now things which are in the basic category of survival, like food and shelter and medicine, are starting to become abundant and supplied by other people. It is no longer important to be a farmer, It is not a crucial component of your survival to be a farmer or to be able to build a home. You don't need it as much. Most people still have it, Boy Scouts, and that's the way Grandpa did it. But their sense of purpose has gone way down, and their skills go down. And thus their connection to their world and their ownership of the world is in jeopardy. But about every 20 years or so, there's a major world war. About that. And wars have always served a very, very useful purpose for human beings. And they knock everybody down a peg. No matter where you are, religious, not religious, black, white, Chinese, you're in that fucking foxhole just praying. Pray to stay alive. And you come home, you're grateful. Holy shit, grateful for what you have. And you saved it. You went over there, you risked your life, your best friend got his head blowed off. They were going to come, those Nazis or whoever, to take this, everything that we have, everything we built. But I stopped them. We stopped them. Huge ownership of the country, of your town, of your freedoms and your civil liberties, only there because you fought for them. Talk about a sense of purpose. Hell, that might just make up for that increasingly compartmentalized job. Now, this continues. Around the 60s, and by the way, this is highly compressed because it's been highly compressed. The human development was, talk about it, the hockey stick is everything. This is the dynamics changed so rapidly. But by the time we are in the 60s, we are starting to see social values are starting to come frayed at the edges because the traditional ways in which we get our values are being eroded. That's where you see hippie movements and different ways to try to live and try to value ourselves. They're coming and going, and there's this fight between sort of a puritanism of the old way and some new way that nobody's quite sure what it's going to be, but clearly it's going to be different because we don't have to be farmers anymore. One of the more symbolic and telling expressions of this crisis of value was the space race. Talk about a compensatorily lofty thing. We're going to the moon. We're going to space. Don't tell us we don't have value. Don't tell us we're not special. We're going to the fucking moon, and we're going to beat the Russians when we're at it. That's going to be a thing. But you know what happened with that moon? First of all, we did it. Holy fuck. I mean, I believe we did it. I believe we did it. Some people don't believe we did it. I think we did it. I met Neil Armstrong once. He seemed like a nice guy. We went there, but the American public, in fact, the world public, kind of got over it pretty quick. You saw Apollo 13. Remember that? They couldn't even get it on the air. Nobody wanted to see it. Yeah, well, we've been to the moon. We did that already. Which, when you really consider how fucking amazing it is that we did that, we had a human on the fucking moon, you'd think that all anybody would have done for the next 30 years is just go, oh my God, fucking God. Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. We kind of did, but not really. And then that was kind of it. Now we don't even have a space program of any note. We hitch rides up to the fucking the fucking human habit trail up in space. So it really didn't usher in a space era. All the money that went into it gave us a lot of extra things, but those turned out to backfire on us as well. But there began to be this fraying at the edges. And that got infinitely worse. In fact, the pinnacle of the worst, the tipping point, happened right after I was born. I was born in 1972, which means I'm a child of the 80s. The 80s were an undeniably prosperous and amazing time. But it also represented the beginning of an entirely new way of valuing ourselves. Because by the time I came into the world, almost everything in our world was coming from somewhere else. We weren't providing it, and thus didn't have the sense of purpose from creating it. Specifically, computers showed up, which was fucking amazing. Like, don't even know. And you have to know what it was like in the 80s. It was like every day an alien race had given us a gift. That's what it was like. Computers, and fucking they could do all these things, and then there's video games, and we were all having video game parties, and then you could bring the video game fucking home and play it in the game, and then there was Walkmans and auto reverse and all that. But we weren't making those things. Japan was making those things. Those goofy Japanese were making all of those things. By this point, we weren't producing as much anymore. In fact, the great era of American manufacturing was sort of on its way out. People were like, Americans can't make a car worth a fuck anymore, but these Japanese things run all the time. And they got these cool Honda motorcycles. And so my generation was coming up with these amazing, wondrous things being handed to us all the time, which we didn't have to earn, we didn't have to build. In fact, we didn't really know how they worked. It was a thing in the 80s. This is a thing, which was, I can't program my VCR. That was a thing, one of these new high-tech devices. When the truth is, to program a VCR, all I had to know was how to tell time in the day of the week. But that was a thing people would say with a straight face. Well, I can't work all this stuff. But they all have them, and they all use them. And the food process was changing. There was abundant food was now available in every imaginable form you can think of. And you didn't have to farm it. In fact, I'm not really sure exactly how it got here, but it's in the store. And you can pig out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All these amazing things coming. No real understanding of them. No ownership of them. No sense of pride in creating them. In fact, we didn't really create much of anything. And meanwhile, the compartmentalization of the work that we do is getting worse and worse. The 80s is the rise of the cubicle, the soulless, gray box cubicle, which almost guarantees that you cannot take any personal ownership of the work that you do for that giant corporation that has put you in a sea of little gray prison cells with highly regimented, rules for how you can express yourself, doing tiny little pieces of work. Sense of purpose is integral to how a human being runs his life. And so, because we no longer had to make anything, most things were provided for us, things we didn't have any understanding of, really. Because we couldn't get our sense of purpose then, we did kind of the only thing you can do. We switched from getting our pride in what we produce to what we bought. We went from a production people to a consumption people. Retail therapy. That's why there was an explosion of materialism in the 80s. Because everybody knows what that feels like when you have something. I just bought this new thing. It makes you feel like you have value. I do a lot of work in economically depressed areas. I'm the director of operations for a charity in Ghana, West Africa. And I also, because I'm a domestic violence counselor, I work with batterers and people in and out of the prison program. So I'm in South Central LA, I'm in the prisons. What's interesting, if you go into economically depressed areas, they have almost nothing, but they almost always have big screen TVs in the house. Almost always. Of course. Because it's such a powerful way of feeling like you've got a piece of something, like you've got some value, it's tangible. And so we begin this process of trying to compensate for the thing that matters most by buying and buying and buying. But you can never really buy enough stuff to make up for what it feels to grow one tomato and feed your child with it. But we try. But still, there were other signs, especially in the 80s, that this crisis of self-worth was getting worse. One of the little ones that nobody was really, really looking at, and I remember it because it almost started on a weekend, was everybody started to elevate their job titles. It was just a little thing. But the janitor wasn't the janitor anymore. He was like the senior custodial agent. And it was the senior sales associate, and I wasn't just a stock boy anymore. I was an asset management director. It was compensatory, because of course it was, because the reality of our work life was becoming highly compartmentalized and unsatisfying. But I'm important. I'm important. I matter. Yes. You're not. No. You're right. You don't just sweep up. No. You're not a garbage man. You're a waste management, resources allocation and preservation and destruction technician of third degree. Yes. Just like the space race, you could feel people wanting to be more important. That's not all that was happening. My generation had all these amazing things, none of which we earned, none of which we made. And unlike our fathers and our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers and our great-great-grandfathers and all the way back to the caves, we didn't even have to go to war to fight for it, to defend it. And so, we began a movement that had never existed in this country or in any stable civilization before. We began to get a hang-up about our deservability, because we didn't earn this stuff. And that's when the very first strains of, who says America's so amazing? What do we do? We killed all these Indians coming over and we had slaves. Nobody in the early days saying those things had fought and died for their country and then come home with a feeling of pride and ownership. In the early days, those of us who began that sentiment were probably right. We didn't earn it. And like a billionaire's son with a chip on his shoulder, because he knows he didn't build the company, he just gets what his dad gives to us, it began a fissure in the way that we feel about our country, and another way in which, across the board, and not just in America, but in the world, we were becoming disconnected from our world because we didn't make it. And so it went. And it got worse and worse. And it gave rise to what we see now in the second decade of the 21st century, an entirely consumption-based people, obsessively consumption-based. That's why we trample each other on Black Fridays for plastic shit from China, because that's all we have. That's why, there's so many ways in which this happens. We have consumption across the board. It's not enough. And so depression and obesity, all of these things are manifesting from the giant gaping hole where our purpose should be. Most of the pharmaceuticals that are coming out are based on changing your brain chemistry so you don't feel quite so depressed about the pointless life that you feel that you're living and the lack of contribution or deservability. And the skills, all of the skills, are eroding day after day after day. Here's a fact. The grim, bleak reality of human civilization in this 2020. Most people are driving cars and have absolutely no idea how that car works. Not even the basics of a combustion engine. They put gas into it, but they don't know how the gas gets there. Oil? Something oil? We are entirely dependent on computers. Dependent on computers. Most people have absolutely no idea how a computer works. It's got a battery and a chip and it runs programs. That has no understanding of a computer. They don't understand, even on a fundamental level, the logic circuit that an elementary computer is made of. Totally dependent. Cell phones, smartphones, totally dependent on it. No ownership of it. Don't know how it works. Completely dependent. It might as well be magic. And the food? Nobody knows where the food comes from. A documentary here and there. But mostly it's just there. It's why our backs is turned to it, and why the food scientists and all the got involved. We weren't minding the store. We weren't farming it anymore. Somebody else was. All we know is we wanted to have tomatoes 24 hours a day and avocados year round, so they had to start ticking with them so we could have. And plus, there's more and more and more of us. Everywhere you turn, we are becoming increasingly ignorant because our skills aren't necessary. Most people today cannot hunt or fish. They can't make a fire. They cannot build a shelter. Most people can't navigate by the stars. They can't do any of the things that their predecessors had to do just to survive. They're completely dependent. Math, you don't need it. You don't need music and philosophy. We took them out of schools. You don't need them. Most human interaction is now reduced to pushing the picture of a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Entropy increases. Do you know what entropy is? Entropy is the chaos field, the thing that breaks down all systems. It's the thing that'll turn your house into dust. And how do you stop your house from collapsing? You fight against the entropy. You go and you do maintenance on it. But in these core crucial areas of intelligence, we don't need those skills. With your highly compartmentalized job, most people can now survive, reproduce, and make money without basic skills in math or reading, with no knowledge of philosophy or history or art or music. They don't know how the car works. They don't know how the computer works. They're entirely dependent everywhere and are missing a complete sense of purpose, which they try to satisfy by standing in line for a $1,600 plastic rectangle that does one more thing than the plastic rectangle from 6 months ago, because that's all there is left. It gets worse and worse and worse. Anybody who's had to have work with millennials, and I shit on millennials deservedly, but it's not your fault. Anybody who's professionally tried to have millennials, they are almost functionally illiterate. They can't write a business letter. They can't communicate. And if you correct them on anything, they decompensate and go into their safe space. We've taken away people's ability to handle the psychological reality of the life. And even that you have to understand, because it's such a crushing, valueless, pointless life of dependence and ignorance. And we're just getting started. We're just getting started. Every day we are being conditioned to accept our powerlessness and dependence. Every time you put an app on your Apple TV, you have to agree to the user terms and conditions. A contract that you had no part in negotiating, which is designed to tell you that you have no rights and that what you have can be taken from you at any time, and is. In fact, that happens all the time. Oh, I guess my bank is different now. I guess I have a different bank and my fees are different. Oh, yeah, my phone company isn't my phone company now, and I have different. You have no say in it. And you need the phone, and you want to have the Apple TV. It's kind of all we have, and how we can talk about the shows with each other. And meanwhile, kids graduate college and can't find their own state on a map, and they can't do remedial basic math. They can't speak. But why would you need to? You have spell check and Grammarly. We don't have to read. We don't have to do anything else. So we watch YouTube videos in tiny little short bursts. Anybody who's got a YouTube channel knows what the retention time is. The attention span for an average YouTube video is 5 seconds. 140 characters. Tiny, short, little, ignorant, pointless lives. No ownership. And we don't make our towns. We don't build our own town squares. So we don't have any ownership of the land that we're part of. We didn't build the house. Construction cranes put things up. They come from somewhere. Financiers, I don't know, they put things up. You just go there. And we don't have to go to war to fight for what we have. And now, in places, the American flag is considered a hate symbol. And all of the drugs and all of the consumerism to try to fill that deep sense of purpose. And so, in the last 10 years or so, desperate to find a solution, because none of these work. You can't take enough Wellbutrin, and you can't buy enough iPhones to blot out the reality that you have no idea how most of the world functions. And I mean most of the world. Most people don't know how most of everything in the world works, not just the computers in the cars. Most people don't know why a red object looks red and a blue object looks blue, or why the sky is blue, couldn't tell you. Or why is a shiny object shiny? If it's metal or plastic or wood, why is it shiny? Don't know. The shadow of a telephone pole, it's fuzzy in the middle of the street, it's sharp at the base. Why? I don't know. Totally disconnected from the world, because we don't need to be. We don't need any of those skills. We're totally dependent. We have no sense of purpose. And in this crisis, at its peak, you know what we did? We turned to the same thing our ancestors did: higher purposes. Now, we'd long since pretty much killed God and organized religion. But that's where social justice came from. Because now you're not just alphabetizing folders. You're saving the planet. You're saving the planet. You're creating a sustainable future. You know, there's millennials who say that's their job. What do? I'm in sustainability. I'm ending racism. These are all great ideas. And there's a fuck ton more people. We doubled the Earth's population just in my life. More than doubled. I'm 47. When I was born, there were about 3.6 billion people. We're right around 8 billion. And you remember when we talked about that the numbers of people helped keep things in check, because more people, less contribution. In Los Angeles, a cosmopolitan modern city, there are 70,000 homeless people wandering through the pothole-laden streets, just wandering around in nice neighborhoods. There are people, certainly in my town, whose job is signpost. That's a real job. They hold a sign. Their job security is threatened by a 2x4. That's how many people we have. All of them dependent, completely dependent. We already had so many people that it was difficult to feel your contribution in 1972. Imagine how much worse that is in 2020. So, the rise of social justice, the rise of lofty, grandiose concepts by which you get your value. And because they are essentially faith-based, not something you made, but something you stand for, they suffer the exact same positives and negatives of religion. They are the new religion. You get the self-righteousness, and you get the sense of superiority, because you're saving the planet. It's also subject to doubt. And today's social justice people react to that doubt exactly the way they always have, with hate and vitriol and violence. Just like their predecessors from 3,000 years ago, when you question their faith, their belief from which they get their sense of purpose, you're a denier. That's not a coincidence. Climate change people will say, the science is settled, which is about as anti-intellectual a statement as you could possibly make. No responsible scientist would ever say that science is settled. It's not. Science is, every major discipline in science has gone at least one or two overhauls in the last 100 years. Science is a loop that goes, we used to think, but we now know, and then you wait, and then they go, well, we used to think, but we now know, and then you wait, and they go, well, we used to think, but we now know. Which is why science, which is responsible for the most amazing, wondrous things you can conceive of, is also where we got thalidomide babies and asbestos and how many planets we got this week, boys? Also eggs. Eggs good or bad again? How are we? It's both. Science is evolving. There's a famous story about Einstein, and he gave the same test. It might not be a real story, but he gave the same test 2 years in a row to the same group of people. So, well, why'd you give them the same test? And Einstein's answer apparently was, because the answers have changed. That science is an evolutionary process. If you follow, certainly, quantum physics, quantum theory, or any of that, that's true. But the idea of that, it must be this, because it cannot be challenged, it cannot be questioned, is what happens when where you're getting your sense of self is tied to. Which brings us to today. Which brings us to COVID-19. Which brings us to the clearest, most brutal examination of where society really is. The curtain call for humanity. All of them powerless, skillless, entirely dependent, totally unaware, without basic skills, all cowering in their homes, with no ownership of their homes because the glowing rectangle told them to. That's it. That's it. And it might as well be, because a species in this condition cannot survive. You can't actually survive just ordering shit from Amazon and having no awareness at all of almost anything. People have seen like those memes, like, can you pass a test for an 8th grader in 1900? And you're like, no. But that doesn't send us into our rooms to like, holy shit, I'm a fucking moron. It's irrelevant. You don't need that stuff. YouTube is not used by most people to enrich their brains and increase their skills. Most people don't have skills, and it's only getting worse. We could do a whole 10 hours on COVID-19, but we don't need to. The truth is, the actual math behind it makes no sense. But maybe if we'd earned the world, maybe we'd have been less ready to have somebody take it from us. And maybe if we had remedial math skills, we would know that the percentage of chances of dying are less than getting struck by lightning, and maybe we wouldn't be so afraid. But we have every reason to be afraid, because everything in our life is beyond our understanding and out of our control, and we have no skills of any kind whatsoever. So, yeah, that's the reality. None of those points are opinions. You don't know how those things work. I bet you most of those questions I asked you, and you're an intelligent person, you're not a moron, but most of the things I asked you, those basic things about the world around you, you can't answer them. I know that. I know that. I know that because at least half of us were born after I was born, when we already had a crisis of purpose. You don't need to know those things. Monkey doesn't need to know those things. But normally we would have considered our civilization superior to it. But it's not. So, that's where we are. That is the reality that we're living in. It's over. Completely over. So what are we going to do? So what do we do? What do we do? Clean slate. If you possess any skills, by the way, anything, if you're not a part of this thing, you're in the minority. You're hopelessly outnumbered. But that doesn't matter, because ultimately, a species that has no skills can't survive. So what are we going to do? It's a real question. I have some thoughts about what I'm doing. I can tell you what I'm teaching Draco. I can tell you what I do. But human beings are incredible. We have what we're capable of doing when we put our minds to it is almost beyond imagination. So I have all the faith in the universe and humanity. I know it. Sky's the limit. We could remake the world any way we want to. I think Americans have maybe a better a better lead on it because Europeans have gotten used to living on their past successes for hundreds of years because they have past successes. I was at the Roman Forum a couple years ago, which I don't know if you've ever been to, but oh my fucking God, it's the most amazing pile of rubble you've ever seen. What was really cool is when you see the pictures of what it looked like, and you're like, holy fuck. I mean, it's breathtaking, even as a pile of rubble. It's breathtaking. But there are no new Roman forums. We never did anything like that again. We never made any other pyramids of Giza. We're still lining up to see the Sistine Chapel and the Mona Lisa, and we're still listening to Bach and Beethoven, been rotting for like 200-300 years. We're still reading Shakespeare. Yeah. We're still, most of Europe is still talking about the big game they won when they're in high school. So I don't necessarily know that that's where the thing is going to come from. That being said, I mean, they have all that stuff. Americans have none of that. What's our legacy? Fucking the Super Bowl? I don't know. Computers, fine. Star Wars, great. So I'm not really knocking Europe for that. I'm just saying that as we look at it, individually, we have to figure out, starting the day they let us out of our fucking cages, what we're going to do to rebuild the world. Here's my idea. Why don't we try what the ancestors tried? What if we tried connecting with the planet, like learning shit? We could do stuff. Like, what if any of our lives, we knew how it worked even, so we weren't so dependent on it? What if we got skills? What if we just turned off the fucking rectangle for a while? Just turn it off, maybe. Or if we use it to learn shit. Maybe we learn why that sky is blue, that beautiful azure sky that's around us every day. Maybe we learn just, how did that turn out to be blue? That might be a nice thing to know. Or why a shiny object is shiny? Because it's smooth. Or why the shadow of the telephone pole is fuzzy in the middle of the street? It's because of the stuff in the air between the pole and the... Or any of the other things, like why blue is blue? Because that portion of the light spectrum is the one that ends up reflected into our eyes and the rest are absorbed. Or any of the other things we talked about. Maybe if we actually began to develop the skills that our ancestors didn't have any choice but have, maybe we would use them. And maybe we would find a sense of purpose in something other than what we buy and what grandiose cause we attach ourselves to. That's my idea. We're going to need skills, real ones. You know what's funny? Even if we don't use them, we get the sense of purpose. Draco has learned to hunt. He's learning to shoot and make fire. He's learning to build things with his hands. I don't know if he's ever going to need to build a house, but he could. You know, that changes the way you feel about yourself. Makes you a lot less likely to do what you're told when you don't have to. And by the way, all these computers aren't really that complicated. It's not really that complicated. It'd be nice to know, wouldn't it? It'd be nice to have other things to do with our time so that when somebody wants to come and take things away from you or tell you exactly what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, you could tell them to go fuck themselves. One thing I'm not advocating is that war thing where we all go to war so that we remember. I don't think we need that because I don't think we'd come back the right way. I don't think so. I'm hoping we can do it without that war. But the truth is we actually are all in this together because the whole thing is fucking over. So, we have a choice, every one of us, just a personal choice, how we want to rebuild the world. Nobody's going to tell us to do this, by the way. There's not going to be like a rebuild the world movement. That's the last thing we need is another fucking movement. The truth is, if you want to change the world, change yourself. You do it. You do it. I'm doing it. I'm doing everything I can to have almost nothing in common with most of my fellow human beings. That's my move. If you've seen my channel, you know that's what I do. I'm trying to not be clueless and dependent. I try to have many skills. I don't watch TV. I've never watched TV in 30 years. I don't watch the news. All the time that most people spend watching TV, I spend learning new things. That's what I do. Not for you, not so I can tell people I'm smart or be smart, but because it changes my life. Because I know what I can do. I'm a content creator. I put things into the world every day. This is a fucking thing that's going into the world. Every word of which is the result of years and years of thinking about. This didn't just come out. I've thought about this shit for years and years and years and years and years and years. I'm teaching my son this. And I'm teaching my son to have skills that his other classmates don't have. Because nobody's teaching them that. Because I want him to be able to make any world he wants. But Dad, I want to live here. Go there. You'll know how to integrate with the culture. You won't be scared of a new culture. Draco sees all kinds of lives in all kinds of places, all different philosophies. He knows how different people think religiously, how they think what their cultural norms are. He learns about all that stuff so that he can choose the life he has. Choices. Nobody's going to tell him, well, you should really be going to college. Nobody's going to tell him that. We're going to say it's your world now. And unlike my world that had a lot of preconceptions and ideas in it and a lot of shit if you went outside you don't have that. So let's give you every skill in the book. He already knows how to work the fucking machines. He's one of these kids. He just knows. And he's better at Call of Duty than I am now. I don't know when that happened. That part took care of itself. But that already isn't making us feel good. That already isn't working. Kids are shooting up schools. We're not shooting up schools because they're so healthy, secure, and have a sense of self. And Dad, most people aren't leaving their homes from COVID because they want to go back to those meaningless, make work pointless jobs, and I don't blame them. So, that's my challenge to you. I know that a lot of people are having opinions, and I don't know if they're positive or negative, and this is one of those times I don't really care. Because the fact of our life is not a matter of outlook or opinion. This is not a view on the world. It's either you're getting real with it or not. But that's just not the end of the equation. That's the start of the story for builders, for people who have faith, real faith in the world and in humanity. This is not a time of ending. It's a time of beginning. It's a great, amazing time. We are cusp children. It's fantastic. So my challenge to you is, what are you going to do to build a new world? What are you going to do? I don't want you to subscribe to my channel, and I've never asked you for a like, but what I am going to ask you to do, for me, for you, is acknowledge the degree to which you are a part of this situation and do your part to be better than that. The sky's the limit. The sky is the limit. I would love to hear your ideas for how we can free ourselves of this beyond what I've already suggested. But I think they've already done it. They did this for a long time. And believe me, we've got our hands full just learning how to hunt, fish, and build shelter and fire. That's not easy. You ever made a fire? You can learn to do it quick, but when you first learn, it's not easy. And then we can maybe take back our own lives, and maybe we can have ownership of our property, and maybe the balance of power will go from billions and billions of powerless and dependent and clueless people controlled by a handful of rich white people to old rich white people to, I don't know, maybe being our world. Imagine if we built our own towns where we actually got together and built the town. Not one of these ugly prefab things that go up all the time, but we actually got together and did it. And you'd want to go in and you'd want to sit down, not because they put up some shitty craft fair there, but because you liked it and because you felt like you earned it and it meant something to you. Well, as musicians among you, we get to feel this all the time. Put a piece of music out in the world. Music is one of the most important things in all of civilization. Every living thing responds to music. Every society that's ever existed invented music, usually before written language. You can't conceive of a world without music. Nobody could. If we didn't have it, we'd make it. This is why, as musicians, we are honored, so honored, and have a responsibility as custodians of something so essential. Which is another thing, by the way, just in case you have any doubts about people's sense of self, think about the billions of people who are being told explicitly, in no uncertain terms, you're non-essential. You know what essential means? Necessary. You're not necessary. You can stay home. Stay home, it's fine. And they're right. They're right. Not us. Let's not go down like that. Let's not go out like that. Let's not. We don't have to. Our predecessors had to farm. They didn't have a choice. They didn't have access to knowledge or medicine like we do. The real trick would be if we built on what they did. We stood on their shoulders. Oh, sure, of course we can do all that shit. They were just primitives. We can do all that. But we can also... That would be a world. That would be a world. Whoa, my God. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if all of that collective energy that we have, that we waste, buying shit and talking about Tiger King or whatever, we put toward something real and tangible, how we would feel about ourselves? By the way, just a little power tip. We do that, the aliens will come. If you're like Mike and any of this stirs something exciting in you, that you don't become overwhelmed by the depressing reality of it, but you can find a little spark inside of you to get excited about what we might be able to do. My advice is we should come up with a handshake or something, because most of the world will attack you, because most of the world is now religious zealots. It's most of the world. Ignorant, dependent religious zealots tied to lofty causes, tentatively tied to lofty causes. You are completely outnumbered. I'm one of those people my whole life, I'll lean into the strike zone. I'll take the hits because I don't really care about the people who are hitting me. I'm watching all the people who are watching it. But my advice is, unless you've got the particular constitution for that, I was raised in a briar patch, so unless you've got that constitution, I don't put yourself through that. But don't let that deter you from doing what you can do, from improving your life. What the fuck else are we gonna do? It could all be over tomorrow. And if you are one of those people who doesn't own a calculator and is afraid of COVID-19, is that how you're going to go out? Cowering in your home? Fuck that. Fuck that. Nature hates that. You'd have been passing through the digestive systems of wolves 1,000 years ago. Fuck that. Fuck that. We're human beings, motherfucker. We put a person on the moon. We survived 10,000 years. Come on. This ain't it. This ain't fucking it. Not by a long shot. My little music community, for those of you who aren't a part of it, our little forum, is a little bubble. It's a little time capsule bubble whose aims are to create a world that our predecessors lived in. That's actually its whole goal. Because we wish it was 1950 or 40, in which case we would have way more skills because we'd have to. But I told you, it's across the board. All skills are down. Why are composers now composers when they can't read, write, or music, can't play an instrument, don't know anything? How can that still be a composer? Because you can be. But you can't in 1950. So you suck. That's just how it is. So we make this little bubble where it's kind of 1950. That's all we can do. So we're talking about that only on a really, 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 really big scale. We're going to have to bond together. We're going to have to do it together. That's all we got. We actually are all in this together. One day when I was in school, I saw a video. I don't know what it was from or what was, probably one of those days the teachers were tired and they were going to show us a video, but it was the Pope giving his Easter Mass in Vatican City, and I don't know, you've seen that, but the where the Pope goes out on this balcony and it comes down and there's a big long thing like this, and on Easter, it is a sea of people. It's like you can't see individual people, and it spills all the way as far as you can see. It's people. And I was watching this video, and this wasn't the point of the video, but I'll never forget this. The Pope is doing his thing, in Domini Patri, whatever he's doing. And then all of a sudden, have you ever seen a school of fish that are going like this, especially shiny fish? And then they change direction like this, and there's this flash across the whole surface, and they all move like it's like one thing. It's like the flocking behavior. Okay. It looked exactly like that, only it was people. And so in this long row, I would kill to have there's the people. And then all of a sudden, through the crowd, there's like these little waves that would go like this, and then they'd settle. And then it would just go like this just for a second. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It was thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It was like the most perfectly synchronized wave. And I saw that, and I thought, you couldn't do this. You couldn't teach people to do this. And it's human nature that when you push on a person, they resist. That's just human nature. And I thought for a long time, I was like 11 at the time, how is that happening? Because people can't do that, but they're doing it. So I thought, well, if I was in the crowd there, what was happening if you're in the crowd? Well, these are devout Catholics usually, listening to the fucking Pope talk about the rise of Jesus Christ. So their attention is fully up here. And somewhere in that crowd, somebody just leaned. Somebody just leaned. Maybe they took a bad step. Maybe they felt a little verklempt from the thing. And everybody's attention around them, they just sort of reacted to it. They weren't fighting it. They weren't even really aware of it. And I saw at that moment, that's how you change the world. You don't put a finger in somebody's chest and tell them how to be. You just lean. You just be the change. At the time, that seemed like a very profound thing to have come to, because I didn't know about Gandhi yet or any of the other thousands of people in history who were already thought of that. But the truth is that we should never underestimate our ability to completely transform this world, now more than ever, simply by embodying the change. You don't have to get on a microphone. You don't have to put up a YouTube video and tell people how to be. That's just for loudmouths like me who like attention. What you can do is just be that human being. A new kind of human being. Not a Homo sapien, a Homo superis. A new type of human being that has all of the grounded skills of its earliest incarnations and all the sophistication of its modern self. We could do that right now, like it's not even a thing. We could do that right now. You could leave right from here and go learn something. You could do it. That's what I'll be doing. That's what I do. Recently, I've watched this a bunch. I love it. I watched 9 hours, it's on YouTube, 9 hours of actors learning Shakespeare. Young actors learning Shakespeare. Young actors like Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, Judi Dench, Ben Kingsley. It's fantastic. Because they're masters. And yet they're young and they're learning, and it's Shakespeare. I guarantee you after the end of that 9 hours, you'll come away with, Jesus, shit, man, I got to get my shit together. Look at what they had to go to. Look at what they think about, every line, everything, the performance, the delivery, all of the stuff that's come before, trying to pay homage to the material but do something fresh about it, all the technical stuff. Masters. God, what people can do when they're good at it. You learn something, or maybe a new piece of software, or a skill, a hands-on skill. part of that new world. I encourage you. I want you to do it. Just start being a different person, a different human. It doesn't take that many of us to change the entire thing. You know, the Revolutionary War for Americans, it was like 10 to 15% of the actual people in the country won it for the whole group. You know that, right? Or don't you know that? Read history, for Christ's sake. At least 20% of the people that were here were loyalists. Loyalists to the crown. They did not want to fight the British, did not want independence. 20%. Although, unlike today's people who will shit talk Americans, you know what they mostly did when we won our independence? They left. Okay, put your money where your mouth is. I think this is bullshit. I think this is a fucked up country. And they left. All right, guess they meant it. But most people actually didn't fight in the Revolution. We were in real desperate times. We bought most people. We bribed them with money and shit to get them to fight. But still, that 10 to 20%, whatever it was, historians argue about it. It's not like we had this picture of like the spirit of '76, all the Americans getting together fighting the Brits. Fuck no, it was like 10 to 15, maybe something percent fighters, 20% traitors. And then whatever the remainder is, freeloaders. But we made the country. It's always going to be a small percentage of us. So don't let that deter you. Don't look for your clues from people around you. Just remember, they don't know how their cell phone works. They don't know why something is blue. They don't know anything about anything. They parrot things they heard on the glowing rectangle and think themselves wise. Okay, just nod. Oh, okay. Read some Sun Tzu about what to do when you are outnumbered in uncontested territory. That's social media, by the way, if you want to know where your Sun Tzu applies to modern day. Social media, you are outnumbered and uncontested territory. Sun Tzu's advice about how to handle that is good. I just don't follow it because I'm one of those. I'm funny like that. Right, somebody says be a polymath with little love and kindness. I learned that word when I was very young. They told me those were two words that I heard very young, that I was polymathematical and autodidactic. Those were two words that I was given, two labels I was given as a kid. One means that you learn to do a lot of stuff, and the other one means that you teach yourself things. And I'm like, everybody in history was a polymathematical autodidact. What the fuck? You couldn't just go. Most people, there was no language, there was no library, no internet. They learned all that shit, and they had to learn to do 10 different things just to get through the fucking day. This is a thing? Oh, you can do a lot of stuff. No fucking shit. So could great-great-great-grandpa, probably more. Yeah, so let's just get real. We're stupid, ignorant, and dependent, and that's just no way to be. Also, just for you young guys, my young bucks in the crowd who may be listening, that's also your best way to get chicks. Just be an interesting dude who can do stuff. That's a little thing. You don't go to those dating things that tell you how to lie to chicks and make them believe stuff that's not true. Just be a dude who can cook, weld, play a musical instrument, and is intelligent. He can figure out the tip at dinner without having to write it down. Your prospects will go way up. You trust Uncle Bourbon on that one. You can pinch way outside your weight class. You can do those few things. Trust me. Trust me. Pick up a couple of weights and, man, the world is yours, Jack. Anyway. Thanks for staying with me for this hour and a half as we did this brief recap of the story of man and where we are. That's the one I told Draco. That's the one that, as we go out together in the world, we look for evidence of. And of course, it's all around us all day long. which serves as a reminder for all the ways in which we need to be the change and all the ways in which we have limitless, unbounded potential. This is maybe the best time ever, ever, ever to be alive. Don't doubt that for a second. The only question now is what you're going to do with it. What kind of world we're going to make. So, here's to the apocalypse and all of the opportunities it affords us. Have a good night.